Welcome to our military history. Today we have something a little bit different for you fine folks. We have an interview with World War II TV's Paul Woodadge.
Hello, pleased to be here.
Yeah,
I'm your guinea pig. It's good.
you are.
Someone's got to be first.
Of course. Well, I'm going to be asking Paul a series of questions about what he does. And I put a little list together of things I found out while researching him. He owns and creates content for World War II TV. If you're not already subscribed to that channel, I highly recommend it. He's a historian, battlefield guide, historic advisor, and author. A lot of feathers in his cap, shall we say?
Yeah. Jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah.
So the first question I'd like to ask you, Paul, is there a defining moment that set you on the path to become the person you are today in the field of work that you do?
Well, yeah, there was two answers to that. One is I always thought there was the direct connection because my great uncle landed on Sword Beach. Lieutenant Cyril ran the 2nd Battalion Royal Ulster Rifles, and so he was someone in my life from an early age. And I always thought that was a defining moment, and it's probably still is. However, it's actually more to do with the age I am, in that when Al Murray's book came out a few years ago about watching war films with your dad, I realized that there's a whole group of us who are within about 7 or 8 years the same age. James Holland, Al Murray, me, and we're kind of early 50s, mid 50s, Peter Caddick Adams, I suppose, as well. And our childhoods, although we didn't know each other and lived in different parts of the country, were identical because we grew up when it was completely overwhelmingly World War II, what little boys played with. And I'm not being sexist, I'm sure little girls did as well, but it was comics, it was Commando, Battle Library, Warlord, Airfix kits, Sherman tanks, Britain soldiers, war films on Saturday afternoon, Cross of Iron, Midway, Great Escape, all that. And then it kind of ended at the end of that decade, end of the 70s for a while, because your Star Wars and everything came out and things. And toys weren't quite as universally World War II. So the next generation, it skipped a bit. And that is why I think there's a whole raft of us of the same age.
Yeah, it does seem that way.
And I guess you almost are coming from the Band of Brothers age group.
Well, yeah, sort of. My dad was I think my dad grew up in that era as well. His father was in the 6th Armoured, landed on D-Day, +6, I think. He had a book about the Blitz, and that was my first thing I ever sort of read about the Second World War, was all about the Blitz. So it was in the family sort of thing, shall we say? Yeah.
But I think that's, for me, that's what it I thought it was my great uncle, but actually it was the environment I grew up in. It was just, overwhelmingly World War II when I was a kid. My dad, when he was a kid, he played Cowboys and Indians in the back garden. I played World War II. I played Union Jack Jackson from codename Warlord, and and there's a kind of joke amongst us tour guides in Normandy that sometimes Americans don't know the British were involved in World War II. I didn't know as a kid the Americans were involved. I only read about El Alamein and the Battle of Britain, and I thought it was overwhelmingly the Commonwealth. And later on, you kind of got the Americans involved as well. So it's interesting because that was that overwhelmingly patriotic Battle of Britain. Tommy in the desert, Tommy in North Africa, Tommy in the Burma, and that was just the childhood I had. So that's really what set me on the path. There was no single moment. It was just complete immersion as a child in the celebration, I suppose, of World War II, which is an odd word to use. I think we'd gone through the phase of the rebuilding. We'd gone through the burying of the dead. Everyone who'd been killed, they kind of were not forgotten, but they were memorialized now. And it was maybe a chance to look at the kind of the boys' own adventure aspect of World War II, post Where Eagles Dare and Kelly's Heroes, where you could have a bit of not a laugh with it, because as you become a proper historian, you realize it's a very serious subject which millions die. But as a kid, you don't know that. You're just playing in the back garden. You're stalking up on Jerry's in the
well, that was
you're
me.
playing with your fake. I had a fake Sykes Fairburn Commando knife where the blade went inside the shaft. So it's like a thrill, and that was what
Yeah, because
through.
for me as well, it's commando books, and
Yeah,
I think I had a plastic Tommy gun I'd run around the garden with.
yeah,
It's these are all very sort of ingrained memories in my head. But it's interesting that sort of your experience of the sort of the nucleus of getting into the sort of the learning about the Second World War and things comes from that too. It's
yeah.
quite
I think it's
refreshing.
universal. I think
Yeah, I
I
think it
think
is. Yeah.
yeah, I know a lot of historians and authors, and I think very few of them would say it was their inspiration came from a particular teacher or something academic. It would normally be
Mm,
something from a movie, a TV show, a comic, war, model soldiers. That seem to be
definitely.
because if it's that learning without knowing you're learning, isn't it? If you're
Yeah.
forced to told you're we're going to sit down and learn 20th century history, that immediately you react, I don't want to know to it. But if you're playing it in the back garden, you're learning it without realizing you're learning it. So I think that's universally how people get into this. I'm sure people
100%.
disagree, but
Yeah.
people I know, it's because of
Mm.
kind of pop culture when you're a kid is really what
Same with me.
shapes how it goes.
Yeah. So second question, which we may have already breached, but I'll ask it anyway. Who or what would you say has been the biggest influence on your career and works?
Well, yeah, in terms of once I'd moved to France, I moved to France 20 years ago to not necessarily become a D-Day guy, but to do something with regards to the Battle of Normandy, and ended up becoming a D-Day guy. And during that course, so my great uncle, again, having been on Saw Beach, was part of it, but also the various authors and historians I kind of reached out to in the early days who helped me out a lot. Joe Balkowski, who wrote Beyond the Beachhead, and an excellent book about Omaha Beach. It was very helpful. And also, I still admire his writing style in that he manages to combine very successfully the detail that you want and how he gets his sources. And notice how this interview with this gentleman changed from 1970 something to 2000. He changed his view and all his documentation that this is where I got assessed this figure from. This is where I got this information from. And also yet very readable and understanding who the people are and what they did. It's all in there as well. So Joe,
Yeah.
Harold Baumgarten was a 29th Division veteran,
Mm.
B Company 116th, wounded 5 times at Omaha Beach. Got to know Hal
Wow.
very well. He died a few years ago. He was a guy who had a jacket, M41 jacket with Brooklyn, New York, and a Star of David on the back, which they kind of borrowed for Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And he encouraged me as well to that you can. There's more to learn about it. I think when you're young and you're studying this subject, you think, well, what is there else to bring to it? You've
Mm.
got everybody's been doing this since Max Hastings and Cornelius Ryan. What can I possibly bring to this that hasn't been
Yeah.
said? And it's people like that who go, no, there's always more to learn. There's always more. There's always
Of
another
course.
valley to walk up and have a look at. There's another bunker to climb in and have a look. There's more
Yeah.
documents to discover. There's aerial photos to pour over. So that I think those two,
Definitely.
and just my family members who served. My
Mm.
granddad was in the Royal Artillery in
Of
Britain.
course.
But yeah, that those are the pink figures I'd like to kind of single out really. But there's
Oh
been
yeah.
lots of others who
Yeah.
help. And now as I'm kind of getting to the you subtly kind of sit on the same age group as your dad back then, which is fine,
Well,
But
yeah, maybe,
now,
I'm guessing.
now I kind of realised that I was just the other last year I think it was I was on Omaha Beach or somewhere guiding, and a guide I know who's a lot longer than me was pointing across to, oh, there's one of the older guys in the back. And I looked round for someone behind me and realised they were pointing at me. Oh yeah, oh, of course, yes, I'm one of the older guides
Oh
now, aren't
dear.
I? Because I still think of myself as being one of the younger guys, but no, apparently, I'm one of the older guys. And I like to now think that if younger people come to me and say, have you got any information about this, or how did you learn that? I would help them, not necessarily by giving them everything they want,
Sure.
but telling them where to find what they want,
Yeah.
and how to delve in and try
Mm.
looking at this archive, try looking at that, and also the paramount idea that none of us own this history.
Yes. Yeah.
That there was something that came into my head the other day. I'm going off an abstract now, and it was
It's
about a
fine.
magician who'd learned a new trick of sleight of hand. And fine, that's his. He completely invented that. He doesn't want to share that with someone else. That's going to make him money on stage. That's his own creation. That's completely his own skill set. Anything we do, anything we find in the archives, anything we discover by walking a battlefield or interviewing someone, it's not ours. It's not ours at all. It's the person who did it in the first place, the troops, the soldiers. So I feel it's important that we mustn't be claim ownership of this stuff. You know, you can claim ownership of your interpretation of it, possibly, but the history itself is completely everybody's. And if someone comes to you and says, you know, have you got information on this? And maybe that information I might have spent 2 weeks researching, and in a case of an email, I can pass it all on to them. Well, great. Then maybe they'll do something to pass on to someone else. It's not going to be, well, I took lots of time working that out. Why should I give it to you? That's not how I look at it.
No, and I you know, to hear it, I find it very. I take solace in it because it's very nice to know that someone else has that view as well. Because I always feel.
Well, I think it's most of us.
Sure, of course.
I think it might have been you. There was someone else I was talking about trying to get in contact with an author, and over the years, the number of authors and historians I've tried to contact who I just couldn't break through to or didn't want to reply is like less than five. You know, overwhelmingly, most of them would come back and say, hello, you know, and you introduce yourself. And this is years ago, and I was a nobody. I mean, I'm not much more than, I'm a Z list, but I was a complete nobody then. And they would come back and say, sure, what do you want to know? Here's an archive. And, you know, here's a collection of documents you can access online. Oh, thank you very much. You know, so overwhelmingly, I think people are supportive. It does, although, mean the people who aren't, the exceptions, they do kind of stick out in your head, because there are, I'm not going to name any names.
No, of course. No,
there are people, you know, and you go, yeah, what a dick, because that person has decided to not be accessible, to not convey some of the information they got and how they received it, or take on criticism, you know, and that's not criticism, but an analytical look at their work. I mean, there are people who, Niels Henkemans, for example, a Dutch friend of mine, who just knows so much about the Germans in Normandy, and is going to be doing a 2-volume book on the Germans in Normandy. He very politely writes off to authors and said, you've said it was 3rd Battalion of the 91st. It was probably actually 2nd Battalion. I know where you got that from. That's from, but I've done. And he's very polite and is very respectful. And he's just very good at that aspect and likes to share his knowledge with other people. And overwhelmingly, people are responsive to him and say, yeah, I didn't know that. Thank you very much. You've improved my knowledge. And that's good. That's, none of us know it all.
No. And I don't think we ever will either.
No. Accepting you won't know it all.
From talking about that might lead on to this next question quite nicely. The hardest or most challenging part of your profession?
That's overcoming the preconceptions of people. I mean, and I'm talking particularly about the guiding aspect of it rather than the writing of it aspect, is that for whatever reason, people come to Normandy or they go to the Bulge or whatever with a preconceived idea of what happened there, which sometimes they don't even know they have, and they have it from movies and Saving Private Ryan and and kind of memes. Sometimes it's hard to get them to kind of drop what they thought they knew and take on board what they really should know, you know. And that, I think, is going to get increasingly harder as people want everything in quicker and quicker fixes. You know, they don't want to spend the time to watch an 1.5 hour show on YouTube when a 3-minute one that they can watch while they're brushing their teeth is much more convenient for their lifestyle. And the thing is, a 3-minute one is going to be maybe more simplistic, maybe have a big glaring error in it, hasn't done the research. And the same with books, and the same with, you know, that's so the people think they know what the things before they get. And I think, that is the biggest annoying thing. Although it can be very satisfying when you can then get someone to admit that their ideas were wrong, or not wrong, that's not the right word, they were
misplaced,
one view, they weren't nuanced, shall we say.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
they go, yeah, that's a lot more to that I didn't think about. And I mean, a particular example that gets that is the idea that Omaha Beach was substantially worse than the other four beaches.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was in terms of wounds, in terms of fatalities, it was the highest total. But in terms of percentages is killed, Juneau rivals it.
Yeah.
Sword had more defenses.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
five beaches are have their own qualities, their own
Mm.
successes, and but Omaha seems to have been is seen now as just overwhelmingly catastrophic
Yeah.
disaster. And as I always say to people, Omaha is a successful landing that started badly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you remove the first wave from the equation, where the losses were just staggeringly awful,
Mm.
actually the second and third waves were much better. And
Yeah.
by midday, things are
Mm.
really quite
Of
peachy on
course,
parts of Omaha Beach.
and that's what I liked about your. This is going to be a bit of a plug now, but I really liked your the Normandy 44 documentary you were involved in, because
Yeah, with
you
James.
made that point, that exact point, and I think it's really important that we don't show the information as, oh, you didn't know, like, oh, it's a bit silly of
Yeah,
you for not
yeah,
knowing. You have to present it as just as that's how it was, and no one's like angry at anybody for not knowing these things. It's just you have to have the facility to be able just to let people know these things and tell them
yeah,
the truth.
yeah. And you can tell people that they may be wrong about something without beating them over the head
Of
with it
course,
and
yeah.
insulting them. You just say, you know, I understand why you think that. I used to
Mm.
think that, or that's how media has pushed us to think this. But actually, if you look at the data, this isn't the case, and here's why. And
Yeah.
you explain that, you know, that there are other ways of looking at it. And but then that also means that then coming back to what we said earlier, is that the idea that there's nothing else to learn is wrong, because you're fighting against the fact that people have these ideas that you can then adjust and say, well, actually, have you thought about thinking about it from this point of view? I mean, the MG42 myth, for example, on
Yeah.
you know, and yeah, that every
The,
single gun was an
yeah.
MG42, every tank was a Tiger,
Yeah. Yeah.
and those things are
Yeah.
getting worse and worse. Every gun was an 88,
Mm-hmm.
and so conveying the reality and saying, actually, have you looked at what the data is? Have you looked at this? You know,
Yeah.
Shermans can't knock out Tigers. Well, they
Yeah.
did.
The
The
Germans are fully
Tiger.
mechanized,
Yeah.
all
So
that sort of
you
thing.
know those are the things that you have. They can be the frustrating things, but then also that, as I said, that you can turn that into a reward when
Yes.
you can win someone over with a point of view.
Yeah. So, next question: the proudest moment of your career?
Yeah, that was the toughest one, really, because it's not a single
No, of course.
I think to sum it up, it would be, and this is about the guiding side again, rather than the being on YouTube and what have you, and
Yeah.
that's the taking either relatives of men who fought or the men who fought to
Yeah.
where their friends were killed, or where I've taken sons to where their father was killed. I've taken a daughter to where her father was killed, and that being able to be part of a process that is way more than just taking a person to a battlefield. And I'm not claiming any kind of greater power in this. It's just the randomness of the fact they booked a tour guide, they booked me, and enabled them to be part of a cathartic process where they
Mm.
can go to somewhere and see somewhere, and you can physically see the change in people, where they're absorbing new data and they're letting memories go, and that is very rewarding. And the chances are they've probably forgotten your face two days later, but they won't have forgotten the experience.
No.
A particular occasion is a very, very potted version of the story. Is a guy who was on a group tour with me, and he was just a bit kind of dismissive of bravery and dismissive of patriotism and the idea of fighting for a cause. And it boiled down to the fact his father had committed suicide when he was this man was a very young boy. And he asked me do you know anything about the, I forget which unit it was. It was one of the American units up in the early stage of the Battle of the Bulge. And they've been overwhelmingly pushed back by the Germans, lots of men killed. And 20 years after war, whatever it was, this poor man who'd been a lieutenant in this, on the anniversary of this date, so December the 17th or 18th, went into the basement of his house and shot himself.
Oh my. Wow.
And left his wife and this man, the boy, and his brother in no will, no financial provisions made. And this little boy grew up with an anger for his father, who had committed suicide. And over a chat over lunch, in fact, I was explaining what these guys had faced and how awful those days were, and columns of panthers coming at you out the mist, and seeing your men die, and how we can't judge people for those memories. And I'm not claiming that I was the one, but he was able to go back home and see his dad in a kind of a new light and understand. I talked about other men on D-Day and in Normandy who'd suffered from PTSD, and I just kind of believe I put him on a path, the first step of a path to looking back at his dad in a different way. And he was never going to remove the bitterness of being left with his mum, without money to pay the bills and things like that. But maybe another understanding. What's interesting is I don't know why he bought the toy in the first place. If he had I never got to find that. If he had such a sort of a anger against the World War II generation, which is understandable, why come to Normandy and book a D-Day tour? That maybe he just thought you had to do it. You're in Venice, you must go on a gondola. You're in London, you go look up at Big Ben. I'm in Normandy, France. I better go and see the beaches. I don't know. But anyway, those I'm rambling a bit now, but those kind of moments when and that's when I'm changing the subject slightly, but I think there's a bit of a view that tour guides aren't really properly, we're not real historians. We're not writing stuff. But the difference is, of course, you're having a personal connection with 3 or 4 people. Yeah. Which an author who publishes a massive, great book, or you're not able to easy to have that personal connection with your readership. Yeah. Maybe these days via social media you can engage, but on a tour you're there, you're right there. You've got to know that person. You spent 2 or 3 days with them. You've sat over lunch with them. You've talked about which football team they support and this, that, and the other, and you can then help them. Understand their family's role, or communicate an aspect of World War II to them based on what their living is or what their occupation is, and you understand how important engineers were. You understand how important signalers were, and those are the rewarding moments.
I think as well, it's another thing about like what you do as a battlefield tour guide. I think is really, really important is it's being there on the actual ground where the guys fought and died. I think you will get so much more from that than you will from a book sometimes.
The two go hand in hand.
So the next question I'd like to ask: misconceptions or assumptions made about your profession.
That one is where I'm possibly going to offend people. Not offend people, but one of the biggest gripes is that people assuming, and when I say people, I'm particularly talking about people the other side of the Atlantic,
right?
Is that they make an assumption that because I'm interested in World War II, that I have a particular kind of set of values and political opinions and things. And when they find out I don't, I'll tell you a story that exemplifies it, right?
Yeah.
I was at San Mariglis, the Airborne Museum, a couple of years ago, and there was a group, and you can spot the kind of group they are: Midwesterners, 50s, 60s, 70s, getting off a bus, and there was a tour guide. I don't know who the tour guide was, an American tour guide. And I was just sitting outside the museum waiting for my group were inside. And he stood up and he said to his group, before we go into this museum, I said, I just want you to know, he said, that all these people here died. The people this museum memorialized died for you to have the right to carry your guns. And I was like, what? And it was nothing to do. I stood up and said, excuse me? I said, the people who died in Normandy fought for the right for the democracy to decide how to govern their country. They didn't fight for a particular set of values or principles. They fought for the right for elected governments to make these decisions. And he said, oh, so I suppose you're some kind of anti-gun person, are you? I said, well, broadly speaking, kind of, yes. Doesn't mean I don't appreciate that weapons help win the war and that they shouldn't be used as tools by professionals, but kind of widespread use of them in civilian, I'm not really on that. I said, but having said that, I said, I would have jumped up and made my point if you were saying it from the other point of view. If you were a group of tie-dye hippies from California saying, these guys fought for our right to change, to not have it. That to me is a very frustrating aspect of it. Is
that
when
annoys
people find out that I'm actually, fairly left-leaning, fairly liberal. And why shouldn't I? If I've spent, as I have done, the best part of my life taking people to the cemeteries full of young men and women who died, doesn't that add a bit of a pacifistic and it doesn't mean I can't celebrate what these men and women did. Doesn't mean I'm not proud to talk about the achievements of men on Gold Beach or the Battle of the Falaise Gap, whatever. But you kind of think it would have been better if we could have had a political solution to that problem somewhere back in 1938 or something, and never had a war in the first place. That idea that if you're interested in World War II, you must be some,
I get totally where you're coming from there. We've had the hijacking, shall we say, sometimes of the sort of memory of the events. But yeah, let's leave it at that because we don't.
Yeah, I mean, I just recently, I mean, because I'm trying to build up my channel as you're building up your channel, I've tried to be less political on Twitter and things like that. And part of me, I think, well, that's good. You've got, there's a business you can try, but also, why would you not watch the film of someone whose political views are different to you? Well, obviously, that's how it is these days. That's how. I couldn't possibly watch a film by that guy because he votes for the other person that I don't like. That's nonsensical to me. I say anyway. That's my biggest.
But that comes back into sort of researching history, is where for a long time I feel like we were only learning the Allied part of the war, but now it's very in vogue to learn about the German side. And for me, coming from someone who hadn't done a lot of research into the German side of the war, it's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
It's in the Italians and the very small countries like Hungary and Romania and all these sort of Eastern Bloc that become Eastern Bloc countries, their war is absolutely incredibly fascinating to learn about.
And the fact that it's simply not a case of goodies and baddies.
No, it's not.
It is in principle. The Allies are fighting for a good reason. The Germans and the Japanese the Nazis stood for this horrible regime. But within that, there are nuances. There are Allied soldiers who committed war crimes, and there were German soldiers who were compassionate and humane, and that nuance of understanding that is something that we mustn't lose. That we mustn't lose that ability to understand all sides and be objective.
So, last question: tell me what it means to you to be a historian.
Well, I have the caveat of the fact that I'm a historian with a little h, not a capital H. I don't have the master's and the PhD. I have a very different route into this. From an amateur level via working in museums and volunteering and doing things with associations and stuff. So I'm not a historian in that sense, although I do label myself one, because my definition of a historian is the minute anything you're doing is being considered of value by your peers, then you are a historian in some shape or form. And the people who contribute to the documentaries or books or lecture, or they run an association, they are all historians. And in my case, it's a battlefield historian, I think, is the label I like to give myself, in that I have spent an inordinate amount of my last 20 years walking battlefields, the same ones again, which enables you to understand the real terrain changes, and it baffles me that there are big, expensive battlefield tours offered by people who sometimes the tour guide, or in fact, they're not employed as a tour guide, they're employed as a historian or an author, has not actually been to the ground. They're going to be then walking people over. I don't see how that could possibly work. I
understand.
You could relate all the information from archives possibly, but you've got to understand the ground. And there's books I've picked up, and I've got, you know, two chapters in and realized that guy's never stood there. Because you can't see that from there. Why doesn't he mention the bend in the road? Has he not ever stood there? And you went, no, he hasn't stood there, you know. And so understanding the ground is the only thing that I can bring, because that's where I live. There are people who live near archives. There are people who are older than me who spoke to more veterans. There are people who are much better at analyzing data and looking at logistics and documentation. That's not my forte, but you know, I still get emails from various authors and things saying, Paul, or Woody, there's people always said, do you happen to know if from the N158 road just south of so-and-so, you can actually see the hill over there? Because I'm reading an account where it says, and I'll say, well, next time I'm out there, I'll have a look. And I'll stop and I go, no, you can't. There's a massive great tree line. And I checked that on it. It was there in the war. So you wouldn't be able to see that church tower from there. So the guy goes, so that means that the observer must have been in a different church. Okay, then he works out and you go, and those are the things that I like to think I've contributed a little bit of understanding to, is some veteran wrote down something, or an archivist wrote something down and said, from this village, I saw this village, and he actually got the first village wrong. Because you get in France, there's a funny story about it's a Utah Beach, 101st Airborne veteran being interviewed, and his name was Bernie Sterno, I Company 50 Deuce, got wounded on Purple Heart Lane. And he landed up behind Utah Beach, and he landed in between Saint-Germain-de-Varaville and Saint-Martin-de-Varaville. But he's on the spot. He's being interviewed. He's got a big, long, cuff, wide, bushy hat. And someone says, "So where do you land, Bernie?" But so I landed near I landed near I landed near Utah Beach. He said. And he couldn't remember where he's, and that's the kind of thing that happens. Is someone writes, he gets just gets the village name wrong, goes into an archive, and that becomes the established version of it. And it takes someone, a historian, to go, that just doesn't make sense. And then they'll go to the ground, or they'll contact someone like me and go, yeah, okay, no, you can't. That bit there is a wrong detail. It doesn't change the story. It doesn't change the fact that the battalion moved down over the hill, but it just changes that little bit that didn't make sense. That little bit, the kind of, you know, you go, that doesn't. I have that. There's battles I talk about in Normandy in a year when I talk about battlefields, not this year, that still have these big bits. Like, I still don't make sense of that. I still can't. And there's a little bit that needs someone to go, yeah, but of course it's the other side of the road, or that little bit that will change it. And that's why, you know, that's the studying the battlefields. And of course they change, and of course the roads are built and houses get built, but the underlying undulating nature of the ground doesn't change too much. And so I like that. That's to me, anyone who brings something to help understand World War II better is a historian. And when I started my YouTube, the live streaming, I got a couple of angry emails from people, I won't name who they are, saying, you're not a qualified historian, you shouldn't be doing this, and you shouldn't be having people on your show who aren't qualified historians. And you go, well, define qualified. You know, I've been making a living at this for 20 years. You know, I could give you thousands of testimonials, people who've learned about Normandy from me. I know what I'm saying is pretty good, not perfect. None of us are perfect. I know I've got 1,200 books over there. I know I've spent hours and hours and hours delving through archives. I know I've spent time speaking to over 1,000 World War II veterans. I know what I've done is of value.
Yeah, and I think that's
I just
it.
haven't come at it a particular way.
Yeah, it's the the academia thing that people sort of hang their hat on still, which I don't like. You know, you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, in Normandy now, for example, there's a tour guide qualification badge. You actually go off and you study it in a postgraduate kind of way, and it's fine. People come out very knowledgeable. The only thing I would say about that is they come out very knowledgeable, having been told the history by the same lecturers who've read the same books. They're the same age, from the same place. and they look at things differently. Now, the older tour guides in Normandy, there's former actors, there's soldiers, there's car salesmen, there's a former monk, there's musicians, there's punk drummers, there's
Wow.
and collectively, we've lived a lot of different lives. And when we sit in a pub, when the pubs are open, they've just been closed yesterday for 6 weeks. When we sit in the pub in a safe year and we throw a battle on the table figuratively and thrash it all out, the views we have of it, will give maybe a better interpretation of it than 6 people who've done exactly the same qualification, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's what I would say as well. Like, from watching your live streams, you have the fantastic ability on your channel to go in depth and go back from the beaches, which is, I think, fantastic to show. And I kind of hadn't seen the scale, because when I went to Normandy, we did the beaches. It was me, my mum and my dad. We did the beaches. We went home. When you pan round back to the beach from being inland and you saw Gold Beach, you really get the perspective of how the land looks, and how, you might read in a book, oh, and they fought inland and it took them a few hours, but you don't know anything more than that sentence. So when you see a live picture of it, it just adds that extra layer of, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but you get more
and
from it, from what you do.
I get what you mean, and it connects to when you asked me about what's frustrating. And just this morning, I was sitting in bed on my phone checking stuff, and I happened to see a 3-minute little video about Omaha Beach that had been seen by lots of people, and visually it was quite interesting and quite appealing. But the history was, there was just bits in it that were wrong, just absolutely wrong. And what I'm doing is longer than 3 minutes, usually an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. And the longer you do things on YouTube, the less there is an audience for it. But when do you kind of sell out and go, I'm going to do a 5-minute thing and I'm going to have animated figures talking about it, and I'm going to have explosions and computer graphics and do that, and it's going to be really good, but it's going to be wrong? Or do you stick to your guns and say, no, actually, I'd rather go into it more depth and go inland a bit? And we're in an interesting era coming up of the balance, I think, between popularity and detail and commerciality and getting it right. And it's not all about hits. It's there are channels out there that get incredible hits, but it's bots and things. That's not how helping people understand. So it's
So thank you very much, Paul, for your fabulous, really, really interesting insight into what you do and how you sort of formed your way into the sphere of military history and the battlefield tours and things. Again, I would say, if you haven't subscribed to World War II TV, please do. It's fantastic. Even yours truly pops up on a couple of videos.
You do. I'll use you again. Yeah.
Thank you very much. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do this. Some fantastic content coming up. And I'd like to thank Paul again. And is there anything you'd like to add, Paul?
No, again, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you for what you're doing with your channel, because you're younger than me and it's new blood, and the more people who are out there doing this type of work, the more chance we have of collectively getting a home run and getting people interested in it and understanding it and going into the level of interest that we have, and becoming the next people to start YouTube channels or write books or do podcasts or whatever.
And that's what it's all about at the end of the day for me. And I hope for you, it's getting the word out. Teaching.
Absolutely.
It's teaching. So thank you very much for your time, Paul.
Thank you.